Male story 1. A couple of years into dating Susan, I had this dream that still messes with my head. Susan and I were pretty solid, but dreams don't give a damn about your real-life relationships. The dream starts with me in my old room at my mom's house, where I used to live. It felt so real, everything in its place, down to the faded posters and the familiar scent of the old wooden furniture. I was there, but I wasn't alone. I was with my ex, and we were going at it like teenagers who had just discovered their hormones. The whole scene was intense and vivid, every sensation magnified like dreams often do. Mid-action, I glanced over to the window. The view of the back porch was crystal clear, but it wasn't empty. Susan stood there, eyes wide and full of tears, her face twisted in a mix of shock and heartbreak. She looked like she'd been punched in the gut, and the weight of guilt hit me hard. I knew I was cheating on her, and in that instant, I didn't care. But seeing her there, I felt my stomach churn. I woke up with a start, the dream lingering like a bad hangover. It was just a dream, I told myself, nothing more. I shook it off, convinced it was my mind playing tricks on me. A few days passed, the weirdness fading into the background of daily life. Then, one afternoon, Susan and I were chilling in my room. She suddenly brought up this dream she'd had, casually mentioning it like it was no big deal. My ears perked up as she started describing it. The details hit me like a truck. She saw herself looking through a window, watching me with someone else. Her description matched my dream perfectly, down to the anguished look on her face. Hearing her recount it from her perspective freaked me out. My mind raced, trying to process how we could have shared the same dream. I stayed quiet, letting her talk while I kept my shock to myself. Even now, years later, I haven't told her about it. I just couldn't bring myself to voice it. It's one of those things that sits in the back of my mind, gnawing at me from time to time. There's no explaining it, really. It's like the universe played a weird trick on us, linking our dreams in a way that still gives me the creeps. I guess some things just don't have neat answers. Male story 2. Breakfast at work is a mundane affair, usually. We have this small spread laid out every morning. Scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, and a few other odds and ends. It's nothing fancy, just enough to keep the dozen or so of us fueled until lunch. I'm always one of the early birds, strolling into the kitchen when it's still empty, savoring the quiet before the storm of emails and meetings. This particular morning, everything was the same, almost too ordinary. The kitchen was silent, the hum of the fridge and the faint clinking of utensils the only sounds. I noticed the ceramic egg tray first. It was one of those cute, kitschy things, shaped like the bottom half of an egg carton but made of ceramic, holding exactly 12 warm, freshly boiled eggs, perfectly arranged, each in its little socket. I grabbed an egg, enjoying the warmth in my hand as I walked over to the garbage bin. Peeling it, I felt the shell crackle and give way, little bits dropping into the trash. The egg was perfect, white and smooth, almost too pristine to eat, but I wasn't about to start admiring breakfast like it was art. I popped it into my mouth, feeling the yolk crumble satisfyingly as I chewed. Turning back to the counter, I froze. There it was, the egg tray, completely full again. 12 eggs, snug in their sockets, as if I hadn't touched a single one. I blinked, the weirdness of it creeping up my spine. Nobody had entered the room while I was peeling that egg, I was sure of it. The kitchen door hadn't swung open, no footsteps, nothing. Just me, the garbage bin, and this magical multiplying egg tray. Curiosity got the better of me. I reached out, touched the egg that had reappeared. It was warm, just like the others. Identical in every way. I half expected it to vanish, or for some prankster to jump out laughing. But no, it was just me and these eggs playing mind games. What do you do when the universe hands you an extra egg? You peel it and eat it, obviously. So I did. Same routine: crack, peel, pop it in my mouth. It tasted as real as the first one, yolk crumbling just the same. I waited, half expecting the tray to fill up again, but it didn't. The egg stayed put, and I was left standing there, feeling like I'd stepped into some alternate reality where eggs had their own rules. It's one of those things you can't really explain. It wasn't a major event, nothing earth-shattering. Just a small, strange glitch in the morning routine, a moment where reality blinked and reset itself in a way that didn't quite make sense. I shrugged it off eventually, but every morning since, I find myself side-eyeing that egg tray, wondering if the universe will pull the same trick again. Male story 3. Back in the day, I worked in a building with 3 levels of sub-basements. The lab equipment I worked on was stashed away in the lowest basement, and I was the only one with a key. This basement was a cold, eerie place, lit by flickering fluorescent lights that gave everything a sickly hue. There was a wired phone down there, mostly for emergencies or quick calls when I had to stay late. One night, I was knocked out cold in my apartment, a good 10 miles from work. At around 3 a.m., my cell phone rang. I groggily answered it to find my girlfriend on the other end, sobbing and hysterical. She kept asking why I had scared her, which confused the hell out of me. She then told me she'd gotten a call from the basement phone at my workplace. The voice on the other end sounded like me, slowly repeating her name over and over, before fading out in a burst of static and crackling. I jumped out of bed, adrenaline replacing my sleepiness. There was no way I could be in 2 places at once, and I hadn't been near that basement phone since earlier that day. My initial reaction was to think she was pulling a prank, but when I checked her phone later, there it was, an incoming call logged at 3 a.m. from that basement number. I stood there, staring at the phone log, a chill running down my spine. The basement was a creepy place, sure, but this was beyond any late-night spookiness. I couldn't shake the feeling of wrongness that settled over me. I kept picturing that phone, sitting on the desk in the dim light, the silence of the basement broken only by the occasional hum of machinery. Who or what had made that call? The next day, I went to work, more on edge than usual. I double-checked the basement, half expecting to find some evidence of tampering, but everything was just as I'd left it. The phone was untouched, the key still in my possession. It made no sense. I even had it look into the call records, but they found nothing unusual. The call was logged, but the origin remained a mystery. Even now, thinking about it gives me goosebumps. The memory of that night and the inexplicable call has stayed with me. It's one of those things that defies explanation, a glitch in the fabric of reality that I'll never fully understand. And every time I recall it, the hairs on my neck stand up, as if that call could come through again at any moment. Male story 4. Back in high school, my friend Jessica invited me and another buddy over for a sleepover. We were your typical teenagers, staying up late, goofing off, and talking about everything under the sun until the wee hours. Jessica's place had this cozy, lived-in vibe, with posters on the walls and blankets everywhere, a perfect hangout spot. We finally crashed, exhausted from our late-night antics. The next morning, we groggily got up, had breakfast, and went about our day like nothing unusual had happened. A few days later, I picked up the developed photos from my camera, eager to see the snapshots of our shenanigans. This was back when digital cameras weren't a thing for everyone, so getting film developed was always a little exciting. Flipping through the photos, I saw the usual stuff. US laughing, making silly faces, trying to look cool. But then a few pictures stopped me cold. There were shots of us asleep in Jessica's bed, captured with an eerie precision. The room was dark except for the glow of a nightlight, casting weird shadows on our faces. The angles were strange, almost like someone had been standing over us, taking these photos while we slept. My first reaction was to laugh it off. "Jessica, did you mess with my camera?" I asked her the next time we hung out. She looked as confused as I felt. She swore she hadn't touched it, and I believed her. She wasn't the type to pull pranks like that, especially something so creepy. I showed the pictures to our other friend who had been there that night. We all felt this creeping unease settle over us. No one else had been at the house. We locked the doors before bed. The thought of someone sneaking in, taking those photos, and leaving without a trace made my skin crawl. The photos were too clear to be some accidental snap. Someone or something had been in that room with us. It felt like a glitch in reality, like we'd slipped into some parallel universe where the normal rules didn't apply. To this day, it sits in the back of my mind, an unsolved mystery that sends shivers down my spine every time I think about it. Life moved on, and so did we, but every once in a while, I dig out those photos and look at them. They're a tangible reminder that sometimes reality can twist in ways you can't explain, and that night at Jessica's, it definitely did. Male story 5. Growing up, my dad had this old toy monkey he adored. He'd call it his favorite child and tease me and my siblings relentlessly with it. The thing was ratty and orange with a goofy grin, and we absolutely hated it. Not that he did it maliciously, but it drove us nuts. We made it our mission to swipe it from him, a sort of unofficial family sport. One day, we finally managed to snag it. Victory was ours. We went a little overboard, drew all over it with black Sharpie, mangled it beyond recognition, and then tossed it in the trash. Dad laughed it off, did a half-hearted search for it, but gave up after a week. The monkey was gone, and peace returned to our household. Fast forward a few years. I'm 17, wandering the streets of Toronto while visiting friends. Out of the corner of my eye, I spot this bright orange blob on the side of the road. Curiosity gets the better of me, so I walk over and pick it up. My heart nearly stopped. It was the exact same monkey, same color, same size, same goofy grin, and even the same black Sharpie lines we'd drawn all over it. I stood there, on a random Toronto street, holding this cursed toy, my mind racing. How did it get here? Our trash got sent to a local dump miles away from Toronto. There's no logical explanation for it ending up in the middle of a bustling city. I couldn't leave it there. That monkey had already defied logic once. What if it found its way back to my dad? I took it back to my friend's place and did what any sane person would do with a seemingly immortal toy monkey. I burned it. I watched it go up in flames, a mix of satisfaction and unease bubbling up inside me. I wanted to be absolutely sure it wouldn't come back. Even now, years later, I occasionally think about that monkey. The sheer improbability of finding it in Toronto still baffles me. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence, or maybe it was something beyond explanation. Either way, it's a story that still gives me the chills and makes for a hell of a conversation piece. No matter where life takes me, I'll always remember that bizarre twist of fate with my dad's favorite child. Male story 6. Back when I used to tour with this band, our guitarist, Josh, had this intense connection to his best friend, Matt, who had died a couple of years earlier. Josh often talked about Matt, painting a picture of a great guy who'd left too soon. He told us about this recurring dream he had, where he'd see Matt standing on an abandoned street that symbolized purgatory. They'd have these deep conversations, with Matt always taking a bulb from a streetlight before disappearing. Josh described the dream so vividly that I could almost see it myself. About 6 months into our tour, the guys decided to make a pit stop in Cassadaga, Florida. They were big Bright Eyes fans, and since the band's singer had written an album there, it seemed like a cool, albeit creepy, detour. Cassadaga is known for its spiritual mediums and eerie vibe. Despite most of the band being atheists, they were oddly enthusiastic about this spiritual journey. We rolled into Cassadaga around 2 or 3 a.m., the perfect time for weirdness. As we drove aimlessly through the town, this big black dog suddenly appeared in the middle of the road, staring us down. The guys, always up for something bizarre, insisted we follow it, convinced it was leading us somewhere significant. I thought they were all nuts, but what the hell, we followed the dog. The dog led us through a few blocks, walking slowly, almost deliberately. Then, out of nowhere, it bolted. Josh yelled for us to stop the van, insisting, "This is it." We all piled out, confused. Josh stood there, looking around, and declared that we were on the street from his dreams. Everything matched: houses on the left, a park on the right. It was eerie how spot on his description was. We lingered there for about 15 minutes, soaking in the strange atmosphere. Then, as we were getting back into the van, a streetlight flickered and went out. The timing was uncanny. We drove off in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. Josh seemed different after that night, more at peace. He claimed he never had those dreams again, saying it felt like closure. That night in Cassadaga sticks with me. It felt like we had stepped into another dimension for a brief moment, where dreams and reality blurred. Josh's bizarre dreams, and that dog leading us to the exact spot, it was like a glitch in the matrix, a twist in the fabric of reality that left us all a little shaken, yet oddly comforted. Male story 7. Middle school, 8th grade. The entire class had to do this cultural fair thing where we researched our lineage and presented it for all the families at night. It was a big deal for some, but I just wanted it to be over. Me and my buddy Jake were cruising the empty halls before the event started. We were bored out of our minds. There's only so much you can take of posters and trifolds. Jake always up for a challenge, and I found ourselves near the lockers. I got this wild idea and said, "Bet you $10 I can open any locker." You pick. Jake's eyes lit up, and he quickly scanned the rows. He settled on a random locker, 424. He jiggled the handle and spun the dial a few times to make sure it was locked tight. Satisfied, He turned to me with a smirk. I felt a strange confidence, like I'd done this 1,000 times before. PSSH. Watch this, I said. I stepped up, spun the dial right to 6, left to 24, right to 34. These numbers felt weirdly familiar in my head. I didn't second guess it. To our shock, the latch lifted and the door swung open. For a second, we just stared, stunned. The locker was full of the usual middle school junk textbooks, a forgotten sandwich, crumpled notes. But it wasn't about what was inside. It was the fact that I had actually opened it. Jake's jaw dropped. He handed over the $10, still shaking his head in disbelief. "How the hell did you do that?" he muttered. I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but inside I was just as shocked. How had I done that? We didn't dwell on it for long. The fair was starting and we had to head back. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I'd never learned how to crack a locker. It was like my hands had moved on their own, like they knew something my brain didn't. I've thought about it a lot since then. It felt like a glitch in the Matrix, one of those moments where reality bends just enough to let you peek behind the curtain. Every time I pass by lockers, I feel a twinge of that moment, that eerie certainty that comes from nowhere. Life went on, of course. The cultural fair came and went, a blur of costumes and speeches. But that moment in the hallway stuck with me, a reminder that sometimes things happen without rhyme or reason, just a whisper of the strange and unexplained. Mail Story 8. When I was checking out colleges, I found myself on one of those endless tours, where you follow some overly enthusiastic guide pointing out every brick and ivy-covered wall. It was late afternoon, and the light was just beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the campus. I broke away from the group, curious to explore a bit on my own. Walking down a stairwell in one of the older buildings, I nearly collided with a girl about my age. Our eyes locked and something weird happened. We passed each other, but then we both stopped and turned back at the same moment, staring. It was as if I'd stumbled upon a long-lost friend, but I had never seen her before in my life. We stood there, confused but intrigued, and simultaneously blurted out, "Do I know you?" We laughed, a bit nervously, and then spent the next few minutes trying to untangle the strange sense of familiarity. Names, hometowns, schools, none of it lined up. She was from the opposite coast, and our paths had never crossed. Still, the feeling was intense, like we'd shared some secret history neither of us could recall. Her name was Julia. As we talked, I felt an inexplicable connection, like meeting someone who just gets you without a single word needed. It was unsettling and comforting at the same time. Her parents, who had walked ahead and only then noticed she wasn't with them, came back and hurried her off. They were in a rush to catch a flight or something. I barely had time to say goodbye, let alone get her contact info. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty stairwell, feeling like I'd just let something important slip through my fingers. Julia, if you're out there and reading this, reach out. That brief encounter has stayed with me ever since. A vivid moment that makes no logical sense but feels profoundly significant. For those wondering, we definitely weren't twins separated at birth or anything dramatic like that. Julia was black, and I'm white. It wasn't about physical resemblance. It was this bizarre, deep-seated feeling of recognition, like seeing a piece of my own story in someone else's eyes. I've tried to rationalize it, to file it away as just one of those quirky life moments, but it lingers. Maybe it was just a glitch in the universe's program, a brief overlap of two lives that should never have intersected. Whatever it was, it left a mark, a small reminder that sometimes the strangest connections can feel the most real. Mail Story 9. Driving home in the middle of a nasty storm, I spotted flashing barricades blocking the side road to the local golf course. Right behind them, a Mercedes with its hazards on. My EMT instincts kicked in, and I pulled over, figuring someone might need help. I grabbed my flashlight and trudged through the rain towards the car. The first thing I did was shine my light in the back seat. There was a man slumped over, looking like he was just sleeping it off. Drunks, I thought. It wouldn't be the first time. I moved to the driver's window, rapping on the glass, shining my light inside. The driver sat bolt upright, staring dead ahead, not moving an inch. I knocked again, harder this time. Nothing. Not even a blink. I glanced over at the passenger. He was slumped forward onto the dash. Now, this was getting eerie. I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff's station, requesting a code 2 unit, no lights or sirens, just some backup. While explaining the situation to dispatch, I headed back to my truck for my go bag, my heart pounding a little harder than usual. The dispatcher asked for the license plate number. I turned back just as a PGE cherry picker truck rumbled down from the closed road. Perfect timing, I thought. I started to move around the truck to get a clear view of the plate, but then I stopped dead in my tracks. The car was gone. Vanished. No sign of it. I walked up to the truck driver, baffled, and asked if he saw where the car went. He looked at me like I had 3 heads and said there was an 80-foot tree down across the road. It wouldn't be cleared for a day or so. No way the car had driven out. I stood there in the rain, trying to make sense of it all. Tree blocking one end, barricades at the other, yet the Mercedes had disappeared without a trace. It was like the car had just blinked out of existence. The truck driver shrugged and drove off, leaving me standing there, soaked and unsettled. Since then, I've had a weird feeling whenever I pull over to help at accidents or hazards. That night, that car had left a mark. It's one thing to deal with the usual chaos and emergencies, but when reality itself seems to glitch out, that's a whole different level of strange. Male story 10. Ever since I was a kid, weird stuff, which I call doubling, happens around me. It's like a magic trick without the magician. I'd put something in my pocket and later find it in another pocket, while the original stayed put. Once, it happened with money. Talk about a lucky day. But the most bizarre example was when I was a teen at camp. We all had these engraved plastic name tags. Leaders issued just one to each of us. I'd move mine between my hat and my shirt constantly, just to mess around. Camp ended, and in my typical fashion, I crammed all my stuff into a duffel bag and headed home without much thought. Once home, I started unpacking. The first thing I pulled out was my hat with the name tag still attached. Okay, so that's where I left it, I thought. But then, a minute later, I pulled out a shirt, and there it was again, the same name tag, pinned just as securely. It wasn't some cheap knockoff or a duplicate mistake by the camp. It was the same tag. This kind of thing wasn't new to me. When I was younger, it happened almost daily. My friends and classmates would lose something, say, a pencil or a toy. After searching everywhere, they'd accuse me of taking it. The funny thing was, I'd reach into my pocket or backpack, and there it would be, even if I hadn't been within 20 feet of them when they lost it. Eventually, everyone just accepted it. I went from being the accused thief to the unintentional finder of lost things. I remember one time in elementary school, Tommy lost his lucky marble. He swore it was in his desk, but it vanished. After he practically tore the classroom apart, I reached into my desk and pulled out the exact marble. Tommy's eyes nearly popped out of his head. After that, kids stopped accusing me. Instead, they'd come to me when they lost something. Hey, check your pocket, they'd say, half joking but hopeful. These days, it doesn't happen as often. I kind of miss it, to be honest. It was like having a weird superpower, but without the cool cape. Now, when I lose something, I wish the old doubling trick would kick in. But I guess I outgrew it, or the universe decided it was time to stop messing with me. Still, every once in a while, I'll find a quarter or a pen where it shouldn't be, and I get that little thrill of the impossible becoming possible. Male story 11. When I was 12, my mom had this habit of letting me chill in the truck while she tackled the grocery store chaos. I didn't mind it. I had my comic books, my handheld games, and the chance to sneak in some radio tunes I wasn't usually allowed to listen to. One particular afternoon, while I was half lost in a superhero showdown, I noticed this old dude heading straight for the truck. His gaze, sharp and knowing, was pinned on me, almost like he could see right into my soul. He stopped, just 5 feet away, stared for a few heart-pounding seconds, and then turned on his heel, disappearing the same way he'd come. It left me rattled, feeling like I'd just witnessed something otherworldly. It wasn't the kind of thing a kid just shrugs off. Fast forward 5 or 6 years. I was lounging in the basement, the smell of my dad's barbecue drifting through the house. He dug out some old home videos, and we were going down memory lane. There I was, a toddler strapped to my dad's back, our family visiting Old Faithful in Yellowstone. The geyser erupted, everyone was smiling, and then there he was. The same old guy, the same piercing look, and the same clothes, frozen in time, staring straight at us through the lens. My heart nearly leaped out of my chest. Seeing him again, in a different setting, yet with the same intensity, was bone-chilling. The more I think about it, the more it messes with my head. That Yellowstone trip was ages ago. I must have been barely a year old, bouncing along in that baby carrier. I've tried to find that video since, to show someone else and prove I'm not losing it, but it's like it vanished into thin air. My folks split up a few years back, and now our family memories are scattered. Tracking down those tapes is like finding a needle in a haystack. Divorce does that: fragments lives, scatters moments. It's one of those things that nags at the back of my mind. Who was that guy? How did he appear in both my childhood and teen years with such an eerie presence? It feels like a puzzle piece that doesn't fit, a glitch in the fabric of reality. Every now and then, when I'm alone, I think about those encounters, and a shiver runs down my spine. It's as if some things are meant to remain unexplained, forever shrouded in the shadows of the past. Male story 12. I was driving home from my girlfriend's one night, taking the back roads like usual. It's dead flat where I live, and the road stretched out like an endless ribbon, straight as an arrow. No bumps, no hills, just a clear, unbroken path. The kind of road where you could almost let your mind wander, but I kept my high beams on to slice through the darkness. Fields flanked both sides of the road, an expanse of nothingness that seemed to swallow up the world around me. No houses, no driveways, just the night and the road ahead. The solitude felt both comforting and eerie, the kind of quiet that presses in on you. Nothing was behind me either, just the emptiness that felt like it could go on forever. Then, out of nowhere, a car materialized about 20 feet in front of me, heading the opposite direction. It was like it popped into existence from thin air. I was speeding along, so we passed each other in a flash, but it left an imprint in my mind. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see its taillights fading into the distance, but there was nothing, just darkness. I slammed on the brakes, heart racing, and pulled over to the side of the road. I sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. It was like my brain couldn't reconcile the impossibility of it. I scanned the road ahead and behind, hoping for some logical explanation to present itself, but there was only silence. After a few deep breaths, I felt steady enough to continue, but the rest of the drive was a blur. The image of that car, appearing and disappearing, played on a loop in my mind. It was the kind of thing you'd expect in a horror movie, not in the middle of nowhere on a quiet night. Even now, thinking about it gives me chills. It's one of those experiences that doesn't fit neatly into any box, defying logic and reason. I've driven that road countless times since, always half expecting to see that phantom car again, but it's never reappeared. It left me with a lingering unease, a reminder that sometimes the world doesn't play by the rules we expect. Male story 13. I was sprawled out on the couch, munching on popcorn while glued to some rerun on TV. The bowl balanced precariously on my lap, and of course a piece escaped my clutches. I watched it tumble towards the floor, waiting for that satisfying little crunch as it landed. Instead, I heard this faint pop noise, like the sound of a bubble bursting. My mom was a total neat freak, so I knew I had to find that rogue kernel before she saw it. I scoured the place. Crawling on my hands and knees, I checked under the couch, the TV stand, even lifting the edges of the rug. It was nowhere to be found. I was baffled but eventually gave up, figuring it had somehow rolled into some black hole of my living room. Flash forward about a year. Same setup. Me, the couch, a fresh bowl of popcorn, and another mindless TV binge. Out of nowhere, I hear that same faint pop sound. My heart skips a beat as I look down, and there, right between my feet, is a perfectly popped kernel of popcorn. I swear, it looked like it had just jumped out of the microwave. Warm, soft, like it had time traveled from the bowl to the floor. My brain scrambled for explanations. I'd been sitting there for over an hour. Not a soul had been in the room with me. It was just me and the TV. I picked up the kernel, turning it over in my fingers. It was real, tangible, but its sudden appearance made no sense. I couldn't shake the weirdness of it. I even checked the popcorn bowl, but it was still full, untouched except for the few I'd already eaten. There was no logical way this warm, freshly popped kernel could have just appeared. For days, I replayed the moment in my mind, trying to make sense of it. I've always been a rational person, grounded in reality, but this one event defied all my logical explanations. It's like my living room had a glitch, a momentary hiccup in the fabric of space and time. Now, whenever I sit down with a bowl of popcorn, I half expect another kernel to appear out of thin air, a reminder of that strange, unexplainable moment that still leaves me scratching my head. Male story 14. Back in 3rd grade, something happened that freaked me out so much I ended up in the principal's office, crying my eyes out. I had been acting up in class and got sent to the hallway as punishment. So there I was, bored and fuming, when I saw my neighbor Tad, who was a year younger than me, come out of a classroom to my right. We exchanged quick hellos as he walked past me and headed down the stairs. Nothing unusual, right? Except, about 20 seconds later, Tad walked out of the same classroom again, passed right in front of me, and headed down the stairs like before. My brain short-circuited. I just stared at him, feeling a mix of confusion and fear. Tad gave me this look, like what's your problem, before disappearing down the stairs again. I was so scared and confused that I started crying and had to go to the office to talk to the principal. They didn't believe me, of course, but the memory stuck with me. Fast forward a few years. My sister and I were lounging in the living room, glued to the TV. We both noticed our mom walk through the adjacent room and into the hallway. Nothing weird about that. About 20 minutes later, though, she came in from the backyard, looking like she'd been out there for ages. My sister and I just stared at each other, puzzled. We asked her how she managed to get back outside without us noticing. She looked genuinely confused and insisted she had been outside the whole time. There was no one else home, just us. I remember feeling that same eerie, unsettling vibe from my 3rd grade hallway incident. It was like reality had slipped up, shown us a crack in its perfect facade. We laughed it off at the time, but deep down, it gnawed at me. These moments, these glitches, made me question the fabric of my everyday life. I mean, how do you explain seeing someone twice in the same place or witnessing a person in 2 different places almost simultaneously? It's like those moments where the universe's script gets a little scrambled. Now, I keep an eye out for these strange occurrences, half expecting reality to glitch out again. It's a reminder that sometimes things happen that just don't fit into our neat little boxes of understanding. Male story 15. I can't explain this, and I hardly believe it myself. I've only ever told a couple of people, all of whom refused to believe it could happen. On 2 occasions, I breathed underwater with no mechanical assistance. I was about 11 when it first happened. I was swimming one afternoon in the diving well at my gym. The pool is about 14 feet deep, with a fairly small surface area. I've always been a strong and confident swimmer, and I love to dive to the bottom of the pool, flip over, open my eyes, and look up at the surface. So I dive down, and sitting against the wall, I have the overwhelming urge to breathe in. I refuse this thought, disbelieving and scoffing at my brain's sheer strangeness. But the thought comes again, and it is utterly convincing. I can't explain why I decided to breathe in. I just know that I wouldn't ever choose to do that, but in this instance I did. I took the most careful, mincing breath in. I could feel great pressure, but I breathed normally. It was air I breathed and not water. I took 4 full breaths while sitting at the bottom of the pool, and after each breath, I became more horrified and agitated. My disbelief was outstanding. I kind of freaked and shot to the surface as quick as I could. After I rationalized a bit, I calmed down. My logical mind kept thinking that somehow I'd had a bubble of air caught on my face, for how else could I have breathed like that? But over the years of trying to make sense of it, 30 years old now, I recognize that air always finds its way to the surface expediently. It won't just catch around someone's face. I tried to do it again that day, diving and diving, trying to replicate the experience. Got quite a bit of water up my nose before I gave up. It happened a second time, same pool, 4 years later. I took 5 breaths, same feeling of overwhelming confidence that it would be okay to breathe. Couldn't explain it the second time either. It's very strange. Glitch? I don't know. No one has ever believed me, but I've only ever mentioned it to a select few. I still can't figure it out. Does anyone have any physics or logical thoughts on this? Has this happened to anyone else? Male story 16. One of my friends has this family photo hanging on her wall, taken in Florida back in 1998. It's a typical beach vacation shot: sun, sand, and smiles. About 4 years ago, we were all over at her place for a party. You know how it goes, drinks flowing, everyone having a good time. Suddenly, one of the girls starts crying out of nowhere. We're all taken aback, trying to figure out what the hell happened. When she finally calms down, she points to the photo on the wall. In the background, there's a family walking past, and she swears it's her mom, dad, and brother. And get this, she's practically looking right into the camera. We were all skeptical at first, thinking she might have had one too many drinks. But we crowded around the photo, and sure enough, there was a family that looked exactly like hers. Same hairstyles, same fashion sense, and her younger self's unmistakable face staring back. The weird part is, she had never been to Florida as a kid, or so she thought. It became the highlight of the party. We couldn't stop joking about how she's a time traveler, or how there's a parallel universe where her family did visit Florida. She laughed along, but you could tell it rattled her. The more we looked at the photo, the more uncanny it became. Her mom's floppy hat, her brother's bright red swim trunks, they were all identical to what she remembered from old family albums. I couldn't help but think about how many times we pass by strangers in photos, not even realizing the potential connections. It's like a hidden thread in the fabric of our lives. Her story stayed with me, making me eye old photos with a new curiosity, wondering if there's someone in the background who would recognize themselves years later. Now, whenever we're at her place, we can't resist taking another look at that photo. It's become a party staple, a conversation starter, and a bizarre reminder of how strange life can be. The incident has bonded us in a way, giving us a story that's just as unbelievable as it is hilarious. We laugh about it now, but every time I see that photo, I get this little shiver. It's like a glitch in the Matrix, a tiny rip in the fabric of reality that makes you question everything you know about time and place. Male story 17. Back in 2000, I had my wisdom teeth yanked out, and it was a nightmare. My teeth were stubborn as hell, so they hit me with some heavy-duty Percocet. I was totally bombed, barely conscious when my mom plopped me into bed. She knew I was bummed about missing The Matrix in theaters, so she rented it on VHS to cheer me up. I remember lying there, half dazed, irritated by the sun's glare on the TV. Too out of it to move, I just let it be. The movie was rolling, and I hit the scene with the black cat glitch in The Matrix. And then bam, I passed out cold. Apparently, I slept for about 8 hours straight. Now, here's where it gets wild. The VHS tape kept rewinding itself and playing over and over again. When I finally woke up, groggy and disoriented, the movie was almost at the same spot where I'd knocked out. But it was pitch dark outside. My mind couldn't process the time lapse for me. It felt like no time had passed at all. I lost my shit. Full-on freak-out mode. I started screaming, convinced I'd stumbled onto some hidden truth and someone had turned off the sun. My family rushed in, panicked by my yelling. There I was, crying and trying to explain my revelation about the sun being switched off. They just stood there, confused and concerned. They've never let me live it down. Every family gathering, someone brings up the time I thought I'd discovered the secret to the universe while high on painkillers. They laugh, and I laugh along, but inside, I still remember the sheer terror and confusion. The whole episode made me question reality in a way I hadn't before. Lying in bed, staring at that damn TV, I felt like I was in my own glitch in the Matrix. It's funny now, but at the time it was like my brain had taken a nosedive into the weirdest, darkest rabbit hole. Thinking back, it's a perfect blend of drug-induced paranoia and the eerie vibe of the movie. The Matrix had that effect, making you question what's real and what's not. But combine that with Percocet and a post-surgery haze, and you get one hell of a mind trip. Male story 18. 2 years ago, I had this nightmare that still gives me chills. In it, a meteor tore through my house and my neighbors, leaving a scene straight out of a war film. My roommate and I stumbled around, half deaf, calling out for everyone amidst flames and wreckage. The pain felt so real that I woke up in a cold sweat. At breakfast, I recounted the whole horrific episode to my roommate, still rattled by the intensity of it. Fast forward about 3 hours, and our house begins to tremble. The sound of a turbine engine winding down fills the air, and then boom, 2 massive explosions. My roommate and I bolt outside, hearts pounding. Billowing black smoke clouds the sky. We sprint around the block, and there it is. 2 houses, or what's left of them, obliterated by a fighter jet crash. Flames lick the remnants of the structures, turning them into infernos. The surreal part hits when my roommate turns to me, eyes wide with recognition, and says, "Remember your dream, my blood runs cold." I can't wrap my head around the fact that just a few hours ago, I had dreamt this exact scenario. We scramble through the debris, shouting, hoping against hope that no one's trapped inside. The acrid smell of burning wood and melted plastic stings my nose. It's chaos. Firefighters and paramedics arrive, transforming the street into a frenzied scene of flashing lights and urgent voices. The whole time, the dream loops in my mind, each detail hauntingly accurate. I've always been the type to chalk things up to coincidence. I don't buy into supernatural stuff. But this was hard to dismiss. How do you explain dreaming about a disaster just before it happens? I've played it over 1,000,000 times in my head, trying to find some logical explanation. My friends and I often joke about living in a simulation, but this made me wonder if there might be more to it. Was it a glitch in the Matrix? Did I somehow tap into some strange precognitive ability? I don't know. It's one of those things that's stuck with me, lurking in the back of my mind, making me second-guess what's real and what's just a figment of my imagination. To this day, I still prefer to call it a wild coincidence, even though deep down, I can't shake the feeling that something inexplicable happened. It's a story I share over beers sometimes, the kind that leaves everyone quiet for a moment, pondering the mysteries we can't quite explain. Male story 19. All right, pretty sure this will get buried, but I've always wanted to share this story. Back when I was in 3rd grade, my family decided to move. Before settling into our new place, my parents thought it'd be fun to take a road trip to see the house we'd be living in. The house was an old gem previously owned by this kind old man who apparently enjoyed fixing things himself. He'd left his mark with all sorts of quirky repairs and modifications that we'd continue discovering for years. So we get there, and it's as charming as described. I walk in, soaking up the homey vibe. As I wandered around, I noticed a sweet-looking old lady in a rocking chair in the living room. She had that classic grandma-look gentle smile, wispy white hair. I gave her a little wave, which she returned with a warm nod. I didn't think much of it. After we'd explored every nook and cranny, we piled back into the car. On the drive home, I couldn't shake a tiny bit of confusion gnawing at me. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. "But Mom," I blurted, "I thought you said the owner lived alone." Who was the old lady in the rocking chair? My mom turned to me, eyebrows furrowed like I'd grown a second head. "What old lady?" she asked. I looked around at my siblings, expecting someone to back me up, but they all seemed just as puzzled. My mom then explained that the owner's wife had died recently, and he indeed lived alone. The whole car ride turned into a weird silent reflection on my part, trying to figure out what I'd seen. Living in that house over the years, I'd occasionally think back to that day. It always felt surreal. I'd chalk it up to a kid's overactive imagination, but it never stopped nagging at me. I could remember every detail of her, the way she smiled, the slight creak of the rocking chair. Interestingly, the house had its own charm with all those odd fixes and hidden quirks left by the old man. We'd find these peculiar gadgets and wonder what they were for. Once we discovered a small, hidden compartment under a loose floorboard in the attic filled with old coins. It was like the house had its own stories to tell. That glimpse of the old lady in the rocking chair remains the most vivid and inexplicable memory from those early days. I never saw her again, but the mystery of who she was or why I saw her stuck with me. I still wonder if it was a glitch in the Matrix or just my imagination playing tricks on me. Either way, it makes for one heck of a story. Male story 20. I've related this story before, but here goes. The parallel universe answering machine. This happened about 15 years ago. I called my buddy, and since he wasn't home, I left a message on his answering machine. I said, "Hey, it's me, Kill All Extremists. Sorry I missed you, call you later. Bye." Then I hung up and left the house. Didn't make any other calls. Later that day, he called back and said, "Wow, that was quite a message you left. Who was that girl you were talking to?" I had no idea what he was talking about. I headed over to his place, curious and a bit confused. We listened to the message together. After my initial message that I did leave, there was a slight pause, and then it continued for another 30 to 40 seconds. The weird part? It was me talking to some girl. My voice, clear as day, having a conversation I never had with a girl whose voice I didn't recognize. You could compare it to the message I know I left, and the voices were indistinguishable. Not just the voice, but the talking mannerisms too. It was definitely my voice. In this bizarre conversation, I talked to the girl about going skiing but mentioned that I had to head down to my shop and work on a car first. The details lined up perfectly with my actual plans and activities. Then the message just stopped. This was one of those digital answering machines that recorded the message to a chip, so there wasn't any tape to analyze. And neither my friend nor I had party lines ruling out that explanation. It was genuinely freaky. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe it was some kind of technical glitch or interference, but it was too specific to be a random mix-up. The accuracy of the details about my life skiing, the shop, working on cars made it even stranger. This experience left me with more questions than answers. Was it some kind of overlap between parallel universes? Did I somehow connect with another version of myself having a conversation I was unaware of? I don't buy into a lot of supernatural stuff, but this incident still baffles me. To this day, it's a story I share, especially when someone brings up weird, unexplainable occurrences. It's like my own personal glitch in the Matrix, a moment that makes you wonder just how much we understand about reality. Male story 21. At 16, I found myself at a friend's party, sitting in a circle, passing around a joint. We were all pretty stoned, the kind where everything feels slow and hazy. Out of nowhere, someone I didn't get along with threw a lighter at my head from the side. I couldn't see it coming, long hair obscuring my peripheral vision. Yet, somehow I caught it mid-air like a ninja. I turned slowly, locking eyes with the guy who had thrown it. His face went pale, and from that day on, he never messed with me again. It was like I had tapped into some hidden reflexes I didn't know I had. Another time, I was sitting in a bar with some friends, laughing and joking around. Suddenly, I felt this strange pop in my head, like my brain had been reset for a split second. It was bizarre, and when I mentioned it to my friends, they just shrugged, having no idea what I was talking about. Then, out of nowhere, I blurted out, "Gary's here." It felt like a certainty. Sure enough, about 20 seconds later, Gary walked into the bar. When I told him about it later, he swore he came because he thought I had called him. But when we checked our phones, there was no record of any call. It was like someone had messed with time and didn't bother to clean up the details properly. Those two incidents always stood out to me, but there's also this odd thing that happened when I got really stoned one time. I had a block of chocolate on my computer desk. Over a few hours, it just gradually disappeared. It wasn't like I ate it or moved it, it just vanished, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. I even checked under the desk, thinking it might have fallen, but it was gone without a trace. These moments feel like glitches in reality, little instances where the fabric of normalcy just tears for a moment. It's weird because they don't make any sense, but they happened. Each one left me with this eerie feeling, like I glimpsed behind the curtain of everyday life and seen something I wasn't supposed to. It's not something I dwell on, but when I remember, it always gives me a bit of a chill. Reality, it seems, has a few bugs in the system. Male story 22. When I was in college, I had this weird experience that still baffles me to this day. I was lying in my dorm room bed, gazing out the window at the falling snow. My roommate was across the room, doing the same thing. We were chatting about how serene and beautiful the snow looked. The night was calm, and everything seemed so peaceful. Then, bam, I blinked, and suddenly it was daytime. I sat up, totally disoriented, and looked around. My roommate was nowhere in sight. My heart started racing as I thought maybe everyone in the world had disappeared. I bolted out of bed and began searching for him, panic rising with each step. Eventually, I found him in the common area. I asked him what happened, and he looked at me like I was crazy. He had no idea what I was talking about. I asked, "Where did the night go?" He said we were both looking out the window at the snow when I suddenly went quiet. He tried asking me questions, but I didn't respond. He figured I'd fallen asleep with my eyes open since I didn't move, just kept staring out the window and occasionally blinking. I couldn't believe it. From my perspective, it was a seamless jump from night to day, like someone hit the fast forward button on reality. But to him, I was just zoned out, staring into the snowy night. It felt like I had slipped through time without any warning or explanation. This experience stayed with me, making me question how time works and how our perception can be so drastically different. I've tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe I was just extremely tired and fell into a microsleep or something. But no explanation seems to fit perfectly. The whole incident felt like a glitch in the Matrix, one of those moments where reality just doesn't add up. It wasn't just about losing a few hours, it was the abrupt transition that messed with my head. It's not something I talk about often because it sounds so out there, but it genuinely happened, and it left me feeling uneasy about how much we really understand about the world around us. It's one of those stories that, when I do share it, leaves people quiet for a moment, pondering the strange possibilities of our existence. It's a reminder that sometimes reality can be stranger than fiction. Male story 23. One morning, I woke up and groggily grabbed my iPod to check the time. It read 5:00 at day. Relieved, I realized I had 2 more hours before I had to get up for work at 7:00. I was super careful to confirm the time, not wanting to oversleep. I set my iPod back on the nightstand and drifted off again, trying to squeeze in a bit more rest. When I woke up again, I felt well rested, assuming it must be close to 7:00. I reached for my iPod, expecting to see that I had to get ready soon. But to my shock, the screen read 4:30. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and checked it again. Still 4:30. Baffled, I looked over at my actual clock, and it too showed 4:30. For a moment, my brain couldn't process it. How could time move backward? I distinctly remembered it being 5:00 assay when I first woke up. I wasn't dreaming, I had physically checked the time. Now, it was half an hour earlier than before. I sat there, staring at the clocks, feeling like I had slipped into some kind of time warp. I lay back in bed, trying to piece together what just happened. Was it a glitch with my iPod? But then, how did my actual clock match up with it? I hadn't touched that clock since setting it the night before. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. It felt like time had reset itself, or like I'd been given a do-over of the last 30 minutes. Eventually, I got up and started my day, but the experience stayed with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had experienced something inexplicable, a glitch in the fabric of time itself. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe I misread the clock or had some weird half-asleep hallucination. But it felt too real, too specific to be a mistake. I've told this story to a few friends, and it always gets the same reaction. Wide-eyed disbelief and a barrage of questions. Did I have a concussion? Was there some weird electromagnetic interference? I don't have any answers. It's just one of those bizarre moments that makes you question what you think you know about reality. To this day, whenever I check the time, I double-check, just in case. That morning taught me that sometimes the universe doesn't play by the rules we think it does. It's a weird, wild world out there, and every now and then, it likes to remind us of that. Male story 24. Back in high school, I had this drumline gig, right? We were the early risers, always practicing at dawn before classes began. One chilly morning, we took refuge in the band room. I was hammering away on the tenors, those big toms that make you feel like a rock star. Then I fumbled and dropped one of my mallets. No big deal, I thought, just pick it up and get back to it. Except the mallet vanished. Poof, gone. The floor around me was empty, just a big expanse of linoleum. No clutter, no obstacles. I squatted down, scouring every inch, but it was like the thing had evaporated. My instructor halted practice, curiosity piqued. We all joined the search, even crawling on our hands and knees. Nada. Not a trace. I gave up and grabbed a spare set. About 20 minutes later, our band director strolled in. He unlocked his office door, the only one with a key, sat down, and then, with a puzzled expression, knocked on the window to get our attention. I glanced up and saw him holding my mallet, the one I'd marked with a distinctive red stripe. How the hell, I thought. No one had entered or exited that room since we began. There was no gap under the door, and it was locked tight. The director's office was like a vault. We were 15 strong in that room, and every single one of us had a collective nope moment. My stomach did a flip, and one of my buddies nearly lost it, shaking like a leaf. We were done. No more rehearsal that day. Everyone was on edge, and I couldn't focus on anything for days. My mind kept replaying the scene, trying to make sense of it. I remember sitting in algebra, staring blankly at equations, my brain hijacked by that bizarre incident. It felt like something out of a sci-fi movie, a glitch in the matrix that just didn't fit into reality. Eventually, I filed it away in my mental unsolved mysteries drawer. Life went on. But every now and then when things get quiet, I think back to that cold morning. It's funny how the smallest moments can linger, casting long shadows over the years. Even now, I can still see that mallet, defying the laws of physics and logic, resting on the director's desk, as if mocking us all. Male story 25. Right after high school, I snagged a job lifeguarding at a water park resort. It was a pretty sweet gig, sun, water, and an easy paycheck. After a year on the job, it had gotten routine, even creeping into my dreams. Most of the time, the dreams were mundane, just another day at the pool. But one night, I dreamt one of my co-workers rescued an unconscious boy from a specific pool. I was only assisting with the first aid, but I remember the boy's face vividly. After a few days off, I headed back to work. Mid-shift, my heart skipped a beat. I saw the kid from my dream, clear as day, walking through the park with his family. They were still in their street clothes, fresh from checking in. No way I could have seen him before. I nearly toppled out of my chair. I spent the rest of my shift glued to that kid. He didn't drown, but I watched him like a hawk the entire time he was there. Every splash, every dive, every float, I couldn't shake the feeling from the dream. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch. Seeing him, all I could think about was the vivid detail from the dream, the lifeless face, the desperate urgency. It hung over me like a shadow. Lifeguarding had always been more about preventing accidents than reacting to them. But now, it felt like I was in some strange loop where my subconscious had bled into reality. The kid's family was oblivious, of course. They laughed, splashed, and soaked up the sun, completely unaware of my hypervigilance. I tracked their every move, heart pounding with every step the boy took toward the water. His parents kept him close, though, always within arm's reach. I breathed a little easier each time they tugged him back from the edge. By the end of his visit, the boy was just another kid having fun in the water, his laughter mingling with the squeals and shouts around the pool. No drama, no emergencies. My dream, it seemed, was just that, a dream. But the intensity of it, the clarity, stayed with me. It was like my brain had played a trick on me, blurring the lines between sleep and reality. That day taught me something, though. It showed me the weight of the responsibility we carried as lifeguards. It wasn't just about keeping watch, it was about being ready for the unexpected, even when it came from the depths of a dream. Male story 26. A few years back, my little sister Susie and I stumbled upon a pair of walkie-talkies while poking around the family cottage. Finding random stuff wasn't unusual. The place was a revolving door for friends and family, so there were always odds and ends lying around. These walkie-talkies, though, sparked some nostalgia and curiosity. Night fell, and we decided to give them a whirl. We quickly discovered they had a cut-off range of about 10 to 20 meters, perfect for some sibling shenanigans. We were darting around the cottage, communicating like covert operatives on a top-secret mission. I was deep into the role play when I said, "Breaker, breaker, come in. This is Thundercat, over." Susie, giggling from the other end, replied, "This is Dragon 7. We are closing in on your location, over." We kept up the banter, lost in the game, until something weird happened. I joked, "Negative, you'll never catch me. Thundercat out." Then, from the walkie-talkie I heard, "Who is this?" but it didn't sound like Susie's voice. Confused, I replied, "This is Thundercat. Come in, Poopsmith." Again, the voice on the other end, still giggling, asked, "No, who is this?" I decided to investigate. I walked into the next room, finding Susie engrossed in a bookshelf, the walkie-talkie tossed aside on the floor. She looked up, said hello, and the giggling continued from the device. I stared at her, then at the walkie-talkie. "Wait, who is this?" I asked again, feeling a chill run down my spine. The giggling abruptly stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Dead air. The closest house was kilometers away, and surrounding us were only woods and a creepy cave we avoided like the plague. Susie swore she'd abandoned the walkie-talkie a while ago and denied any part in the bizarre conversation. Her face paled when I recounted the details. She looked genuinely scared. We tore the place apart, searching for any explanation. Nothing. No signs of anyone or anything that could have been the mystery voice. We tried the walkie-talkies again, hoping to catch our ghostly giggler, but it never responded. The signal stayed dead. Every so often I'll tease Susie about it, accusing her of masterminding the whole thing. But deep down, I know she was as spooked as I was. The look on her face when I told her what happened wasn't something she could fake. That night, the cottage felt a little more mysterious, a bit more alive with secrets. It's one of those weird, unexplainable moments that sticks with you, forever filed under unsolved mysteries. Mail Story 27. Back in the days of AIM, my friend had this recurring away message that she was obsessed with. She was a massive Beatles fan and loved anything to do with John and Yoko. Her go-to message was acorns for peace. It was her little nod to their quirky protest for world peace. One afternoon, I was wandering around my college campus, thinking about her message. For the life of me, I couldn't remember the exact phrase. My brain was stuck on a loop. Something for peace. Something for peace. What the hell is that away message? It was bugging me, gnawing at the back of my mind. The campus was buzzing with activity, students rushing to classes, some lounging around with textbooks they weren't really reading, others just lost in their own worlds. I was about to give up on remembering when, out of nowhere, this girl on a cell phone walked by me. She was in the middle of a heated conversation, clearly not having the best day. Then, she screamed acorns right into her phone. I stopped in my tracks, stunned. There it was, the exact word I was struggling to recall, shouted out loud at the perfect moment. It was like the universe had heard my thoughts and decided to mess with me a bit. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. It's not every day someone randomly yells acorns in your vicinity, especially right when you need it. That moment made my day. It was a small, almost trivial thing, but it felt like a little cosmic joke just for me. Campus life went on around me, but I couldn't shake the grin off my face. It's funny how something so random can give you such a lift. Later, I told my friend about the weird coincidence. She found it hilarious and somehow very fitting, given her love for John and Yoko's eccentricities. It became a running joke between us, a strange little memory that connected us even more. Years have passed, but I still think about that day every once in a while. It's one of those odd, serendipitous moments that stick with you. Whenever I hear the word acorns, it brings a smile to my face. It's a reminder that life's little glitches can sometimes be the most delightful surprises. Mail Story 28. About a year ago, my online friend's cat ran away. He was devastated. This cat wasn't just a pet, it was practically his best buddy, having grown up together. He poured out his heart in our chats, and I could feel his pain through the screen. It reminded me of a vague conversation we'd had ages ago. He'd mentioned his cat getting stuck in a local barbecue joint for 3 days once. I didn't bring it up, thinking it might add to his distress. 3 days passed, and just when the situation seemed hopeless, the cat came back. It strolled in like nothing had happened, but it reeked of barbecue sauce. My friend was relieved, overjoyed, but also puzzled. He pieced together the cat's adventure, realizing it had probably gotten stuck in that same barbecue restaurant again. The place was closed over the weekend, which explained the 3-day absence and the smell. Here's the kicker, though. When I mentioned our old conversation about the cat's previous adventure, he looked confused. He swore up and down that his cat had never run away before. I scoured our chat logs, searching for any mention of that past incident. Nothing. Not a single reference to a runaway cat or a barbecue restaurant. It was like the memory had been plucked from thin air. I felt a strange mix of déjà vu and disbelief. How could I remember something so clearly that he insisted had never happened? And how did the details align so perfectly with this recent escapade? My friend didn't even know there was a barbecue place near his house until he went searching for the cat. I couldn't shake the feeling of being in some weird Twilight Zone. It was like a glitch in the Matrix, where reality twisted and memories became unreliable. I even considered the possibility of a shared dream or some weird cosmic joke. But there it was, the cat, smelling of smoky ribs, confirming a story that supposedly never existed. Life went back to normal for my friend, but that incident stuck with me. It was a small, strange blip in the fabric of my otherwise ordinary existence. Sometimes, when I smell barbecue, I think of that cat and the bizarre overlap of memories and reality. It's one of those odd moments that makes you question the nature of memory and the little glitches that keep life interesting.